Coming up on this episode of Common Denominator.
There's no comparison to the discovery that happens through the pleasure of growing it. But really more than that, the aha moment occurs oftentimes when they take that carrot right out of the ground, or that radish, or that tomato, or whatever it is they grew, and taste it for the very first time as a fresh from the garden experience.
This is Common Denominator, straight-up conversations with Moshe Popak. Relying on critical thinking and open-spirited debate, we invite you to find common ground on everyday issues and encourage you to be bold, to be optimistic, and to take action. To learn more, head to MoshePopak.com, and we'd be so grateful if you'd like, share, and subscribe to the show. Now, here's your host, Moshe Popak.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show. Today, how you can grow delicious fruits and veggies on your balcony or your porch or even inside your house. Joe Lample, a.k.a. the Joe behind Joe Gardener, is one of the country's most recognized and trusted personalities in gardening and green living. He's the longtime host of Growing a Greener World on PBS, the host of the Joe Gardener Show podcast, and the founder of the Online Gardening Academy. And he's about to turn us all into expert gardeners. Thank you, Joe, for joining us here on Common Denominator.
You're welcome, Moshe. Thank you for having me.
So you have a tremendous passion for teaching people about organic gardening.
Yes.
Why is that?
I think that everyone is connected to the earth, and a lot of people haven't discovered that yet, or they don't know it. But I think there's a moment in our lives, whenever that happens, when we actually make that connection, there's like a switch that goes off. And it's an experience that is so unique. Until it happens, you don't know what you're missing. And when you combine that with the opportunity to grow your own food and to influence our biodiversity and our healthy ecosystems one way or the other, there is a lot to that. It's not, it can be just a passion. It can be a hobby. It can be whatever works for that person, but it can be so much more for every person that does that if they choose to let that happen. And when you open your mind to all the possibilities that are connected through gardening, such as environmental stewardship, how we choose to take care of that environment around us, how we choose to nurture the soil, how we choose to regenerate that soil and sequester carbon. These are things way beyond just gardening, but it's there. And we're learning more and more about all of those things. But now more than ever, it's so important because we're talking about millions and millions of people, Moshe, especially around the world, who, whether it's gardening or market farming or farming on a larger scale, we really have the ability to impact climate and environmental health. And that's a big deal.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Growing up in New York, we didn't see too much of that, the gardening process. We go to the store and we would have, and I say it this way, we would have the privilege of getting fruits and vegetables, and we knew that, but I never really experienced it till years later.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, one tremendously impactful story that I had, I'm driving in North Miami. We go to a gas station, and the young boy is buying some chips and a donut and some grape drink. And my wife turns to him and says, why don't you just grab a banana maybe? And he just looks at her with this perplexed look. And I wondered, and then it began that journey. How many people in America today or in the world do not even know, which is crazy, do not even know what a fruit or vegetable is?
Yeah, at least where it comes from, and when they see it, whether it's in the lunch line or in a can, coming out of a can or something like that, there's no comparison to the discovery that happens through the pleasure of growing it. But really more than that, the aha moment occurs oftentimes when they take that carrot right out of the ground, or that radish, or that tomato, or whatever it is they grew, and taste it for the very first time as a fresh from the garden experience. Night and day difference. and that can be the switch that connects for a lot of people. But you're so true about that. And there's these food deserts all over the country, unfortunately, where people don't even have a place to go get fresh produce within a reasonable distance from where they live, and that's a shame. Now, fortunately, I think we're making great improvements there, but there's still too many food deserts around this country and beyond.
I think that when we're fortunate, we were able to get in the middle of nowhere, middle of actually not too far from where you are in Atlanta. We have a farm, and we bought it a couple of years ago, and just making a bonfire. We're growing some herbs, some vegetables, some fruit trees, and watching the kids connect for free. I always say that, right? You plant the seeds and you do the work, and you have food, right? Food, clothing, and shelter. If you get food for free, right? If you have food for free, and I watch my kids' eyes light up, and they always talk about their best experience is just being on the land or with the land. It's tremendous to see that.
There you go. That's part of that connection. And this as well as anybody these days, getting kids back outside and connected with the land is harder to do because there's so many other distractions and things that steal them away from that. And then with, urban encroachment and fewer and fewer green spaces these days, I mean, we've got our work cut out for us, but good for you and for anybody that has an opportunity to expose children to this, because until that happens, they don't know what they're missing, and lives can be changed for the better when they do make that exposure.
So I know today 93% of Americans live in urban environments. Let's talk about practically. How can people start? Let's say they say, you know what, I want to start gardening. How they're living in an apartment complex, how can they practically start the process?
Great question. Okay, so ideally, it would be great if within their apartment complex or within close proximity to where they live, there's a community garden environment where someone else is providing the land and the raised beds and the plot and the soil, and all they need to do is maybe get their name on a waiting list, or maybe if they're lucky, they don't even have to wait, but they've got their seeds, and there's people in that community, that garden area, that can train them and mentor them and help them. And not to mention the fact that you're not only growing the food and the flowers, but you're also communing with your neighbors. How unique is that these days? So that's the first thing. But even if that doesn't exist, and there are growing environments where you can do it on your kitchen counter. And I'm not kidding about this. I mean, with the technology that's available today, it can be literally idiot-proof to take some seed packs that are kind of embedded in these cartridges that you insert into these little, I'd call them computers practically, that hold water but are programmed so that you can, I'm doing it right here, Moshe, just as a fun side thing. I'm growing indoor food, no exposure to sunlight, but because of the LED lights and the automation, I don't have to think twice, but I've got fresh salad and little dwarf tomatoes growing out of this system. So there's that opportunity. So those are the two extremes. But the other thing is, maybe you've got a balcony or a deck or some area that gets some amount of sun. It doesn't even need to be full sun, although if you did get full sun, that opens up your opportunities a lot. But between containers and grow bags and the way that growers these days have developed plants and vegetables that are ideally suited for small spaces, there no longer is any barrier to entry. We can just grow food wherever we live, even if we don't have an outdoor space.
If you're just joining us, today we're talking with Joe Lample, the Joe behind Joe Gardener. Next week, my guest will be Dr. Bradley Nelson, one of the world's leading experts on natural methods of achieving wellness. He'll help you release trapped emotions and live a healthier life, both physically and spiritually. So make sure to subscribe to Common Denominator so you don't miss an episode. Now, back to the show. You talk about community gardens. Just again, people are living in these urban areas. What in my research, and I'll get to this. Why? My wife's vision. It's called Neighborhood Farms USA. There aren't enough community gardens, so we came up with this idea in these affordable housing complexes, it's just a very simple concept. So we have the landscapers that are sitting there growing non-edible food,
Right.
like trees and landscaping. And we said, you know what? Let's create community gardens in these common area spaces.
Mm.
And we've done this in a few of that's our main business in real estate. And we've done this in a few of our complexes, and we're seeing the buy-in. You talk about the smiles on the kids' faces when they pull that carrot out and they eat that mango, that fresh mango.
Oh,
It is
yeah.
unbelievable.
That's for sure. And in addition to that, you've got the family interaction too. This is an activity that the parents and the kids and the grandparents can do. And I mean, what a bonding experience to do that and have those shared memories in addition to teaching these kids this new skill that for some will last a lifetime,
Yeah, it's tremendous. And I know that you're very cautious about people not burning out as well. So you start, like everything, right? You're like, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to make this happen.
Yes.
And so what, in your experience, people, when they have burnout, what is actually happening? In other words, they're probably going gung-ho about it, and what actually practically happens?
They dove in with both feet, so all that zest, and they just went for it. And what they didn't know was if you provide some basic necessities of plant growth, like soil and water, these things take off. I mean, the DNA is in the seed or the plant for it to do what it needs to do, because what it needs to do is reproduce itself. And so it wants to flower and fruit and go to seed so that it can make more of itself. And so that DNA is there. So when we plant, a little packet of seeds for $2 has maybe 25 or 50 seeds in it. Maybe we toss them all out in a small space. And the next thing we know, these things are going gangbusters. And it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Now, take that to a little bit of a larger footprint, and maybe they have a real job and they come home, and it's like the weekends are like all of a sudden they're pruning and they're trimming and they're weeding and they're watering and they're wondering if they've got a pest or a disease, because that can happen too. That's the reality of it. But my point is, by taking on what they don't even know is a lot initially, it becomes a lot quickly. And that's where I fear the burnout can happen, is that they're like, oh my gosh, this is just too much work for the time that I have. And this isn't what I was bargaining on. And they've just overdone it. And so my admonition to everybody that is a new gardener that starts is to say, start slow. And you can always build on it. You can always add to it, but I do not want you to burn out. And the quickest way for that to happen is just everything just gets away from you and you feel overwhelmed.
Because right now, as we're trying to scale, as we're growing the Neighborhood Farms USA, that's exactly the pain point that I want. We think about this sustainable, the people in the community together with the hired landscapers. We want the people in the community to take ownership. We want to take ownership and on a sustainable basis. Any practical advice that people will be sustainable and the people will love it for years to come?
If you can have some sort of maybe there's a community event center in the complex or something where there's opportunities to have meetings or get-togethers or whatever, and just let the tenants know what's about to happen or what the vision is, and present the opportunity, paint the picture. I think you lay out the realities, the good, the bad, and the potential ugly. Right. But of course, you're selling the good, because that's going to sell itself once they put those seeds in the ground. I'm telling you what, I think the ownership happens from the moment that they insert that seed or that seedling, because they all of a sudden they feel connected, and they've got this, they're stewarding this live thing, this plant or this seed. It's now under their care and under their watch, and they're responsible for it. And let me just tell you, I think something inherently within us takes place to take ownership over that. And the wonder and the mystery. And now you're like, you plant the seed and it's like, is this going to sprout? And then it does. And it's like, all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, now what do I do? And so they're all in at that point. And then if there's got to be a mentor, there's got to be somebody there for them to ask questions of, and that person can guide them and lead them to the proper answers and coach them along the way, like how much water is too much water, or, just there's a lot to know, but that could happen with master gardeners or just other experienced gardeners in the area, but somebody needs to be there for them. So they're not just guessing. Now, that said, making mistakes is part of the game and learning how to be a better gardener, but they may not know how to fix that issue, and they may give up before they solve that problem. And that's where that other person comes in that can guide them. So I think for every situation like that, Moshe, you need somebody that can kind of take the helm and say, I've had some experience, or engage a master gardener, because all over the country, in every county, there are master gardener organizations with volunteers that are experienced, that have the training, that would love to satisfy their required volunteer hours each year by helping steward and mentor new gardeners in a community garden setting. That would be amazing.
That is amazing. I love that advice. I'm actually gonna reach out to the master gardeners. I did not realize that. That's tremendous.
Yes.
From a general perspective, I also only recently did I begin to understand the difference between organic and non-organic. It seems like this popular word, you see it on a lot of packaging, on a lot of food, organic. What is, just so we tell the listeners, what is the practical difference between organic foods and non-organic foods?
So organic foods are not treated with any synthetic pesticide, herbicide, fertilizer, or chemical otherwise. So you're working with the soil. With organic gardening and farming, you're building the soil health. And when you build the soil health, rather than feeding the plant, you're feeding the soil with what it needs to produce the nutrients that will feed the plant as Mother Nature designed it to be. Because of that, you are eating clean. You're not putting synthetic chemicals into your body. And one of the big pros about learning to grow your own food is taking control over how we grow the food that we grow, that we end up eating. If you want to have more control over the food that you eat, either buy organic and support organic growers, or learn to do it yourself. And when you learn to do it yourself, you're really zeroing in on zero food miles, or supporting a farmer's market. But the thing about synthetic chemicals, we don't need them, first of all. And when we use them, a lot of times those chemicals have far-reaching consequences, such as with pesticides. We're so quick to reach for that spray bottle, that synthetic spray bottle of pesticide or insecticide, and those chemicals can't tell the difference between a good bug and a bad bug. And yet there's only 1% of all the bugs in the country or the world that are bad. That makes 99% either beneficial or neutral. So why are we spraying all of the plants with something that doesn't know the difference and will kill anything that it comes in contact with? And so synthetic chemicals are more apt to do that. And when you learn other ways to manage those challenges as they come up organically and work with Mother Nature, we're eliminating a lot of those chemicals that would otherwise go into our bodies.
So I know I saw recently the lawsuits against Roundup. You talk about synthetic, right? I think that for some reason, these products are still used in farming in the U.S. Is there still a big pushback on that issue? Because that I mean, they said that there was some link. I was reading some link to cancer. I don't know how accurate that was. It was just something I read in passing.
Oh, that's a great debate. Roundup, the active ingredient is called glyphosate, and it kills everything that it comes in contact with, essentially. And farmers, large scale farmers especially, need to produce crops that are free of weeds. And so this product is that, and it's been around for a long time, but there have been many tests that have been found to have a link to cancer through glyphosate, and, many lawsuits. And yet, even while this is going on, there is development of genetically modified crops that are resistant to Roundups, which means the crops are resistant to Roundup, so they can spray more of this chemical over fields of food and grain and whatever it is that they are growing. Now, it more than they ever had, and they can kill the weeds underneath it. Whereas before, Roundup Ready crops, they couldn't use the chemical, because if they did, it would kill the crops as well as the weeds. But now they've science has developed through genetic modification crops that can resist this otherwise very effective chemical, and which translates to the fact that now we are now, if we're not buying organic or growing it ourselves, we are consuming a lot more of this product into our bodies. And so anybody that submitted a blood test or did some sort of test to determine what chemicals are in your body, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone in this country or world that, well, I'll say country, that doesn't have glyphosate in their system already.
Wow. Wow. It's, tremendous to be aware of. I think step one, like I said, the example of the kid, I think step one would be become familiar with fruits and vegetables, become familiar between the difference between organic and not organic, right? And begin that journey. But I know, talking about a journey, you were 8 years old in Miami when you started on this passion. Tell us that story.
I remember it so clearly, and I don't know that there's any event in my life going back that far, certainly, that I can remember like that. But it was a Saturday weekend. I was the youngest of 4 boys. My next oldest brother was 5 years older than me. So at 8, he's 13. So he's off, yucking it up with all his buddies and not wanting to hang out with his 8-year-old little brother. But my dad was the weekend warrior. He was, had a full-time job in insurance, but on the weekends he mowed the grass and trimmed the driveway and the bushes and got everything looking nice for the week. So I'd hang out with him, and I loved that. But at the end of one day on a Saturday, he had finished up his work that afternoon, and he went inside, and I still had some energy. So I'm running around, and I accidentally ran by one of the bushes he just got through pruning, and I broke a branch down at the base of it. And, I didn't want to get in trouble. Not that I would have. I'm sure nothing would have happened. But just as I guess maybe 8-year-old boys do, they want to cover their tracks. They don't want to get caught. So I took that stick or that branch and shoved it into the ground right next to the base of the plant and then covered it up with the soil. Well, as you know, living in Miami, things are pretty easy to grow there. I mean, things just take off when given that nice warm weather and that loose soil. So I didn't know that. I just was trying to cover my tracks. Anyway, I went about my business, and I happened upon that bush, I don't know, maybe it was 2 months later, something like that. And I remember that triggered that incident in my head. Oh yeah, that I broke a branch right here. So I started looking for it because I expected to find a dead branch, but I couldn't find it. And then I finally realized this is the bush that I had broken that branch off of. And is that the branch? Because my question was, it didn't look dead at all. In fact, it was just the opposite. It had sprouted new leaves, and it gave a little resistance when I tugged it because there were some roots developing there. And when I looked at that, my world changed forever. My mind was blown. I could not figure out how that happened because I didn't know how plants grew. But the fact that it had survived, and not only that, it was thriving, I had to know more. So long story short, from that moment forward, I started growing everything you could possibly grow, from seed, bushes, digging up stuff. I mean, I could not get enough. I was reading books, and I've never looked back. And it's been my life's passion, my vocation, my avocation. Everything I do these days has some connection to gardening, and I love it. I love it so much.
And I know from that you have a tremendously successful show, Growing a Greener World. How has that experience been for you?
That's been a real joy of mine. I was the host of 2 national television shows prior to that for gardening, and those were great. But all along those other 6 years prior to Growing a Greener World that I created in 2009, I loved my role as a garden TV host. It was amazing because we traveled all over the country. We met cool people and saw beautiful places, and what could be better except the fact that there were writers for the shows and I was just the host, but I had this deep knowledge of horticulture and how maybe the message should be told, but I really didn't have the freedom to dictate the narrative. I was more reading a script kind of. So I decided after my second show of 6 years in, I said, I'm going to create my own television series. And I knew that I wanted to teach people how to grow food. I knew I wanted to talk about organic gardening. I knew I wanted to talk about lightening your environmental footprint and how to do that through television, because no one else was doing that kind of show related to gardening. And yet there were all these gardeners pining for a show like that. But I wanted to weave in that environmental message too, because that to me is just, you can't separate the two, or you shouldn't. They should be one and the same. And so I took a year off, and I I thought through the show and I shot a pilot and submitted it to PBS, and they jumped all over it, and it got accepted around the country rapidly. And next thing you knew, I did 26 episodes the first year, and we realized that all about killed my whole crew, because that's a very aggressive series when you're traveling all over the country. Each episode was in a different part of the country, and so we were going, it was crazy. So I backed off on the volume per season, but we're now in season 13, and it's been a real joy, and I've met some incredible people, seen some great places, and from the response I get from the viewers, I've changed a lot of their worlds too, and that really makes me happy. That's what keeps me going, is just to get this feedback of realizing that I've impacted other people's lives and this country, so it's, I mean, in a small way, but still through a big national television platform, you reach a lot of people, but I've got them thinking differently about how they garden and how they use how they take care of the soil versus just reaching for that chemical bottle and things like that. So I feel very thankful that I'm in a platform that allows for that to happen, not only through television, but through all the, the social media and the internet and all of that now, with all that we have available for us. So it's been an amazing ride.
And I also know you have, you actually teach in your online gardening academy.
Yes.
Which is probably so fulfilling.
It was always a dream of mine to teach people more interactively, because my mother was a high school teacher and I thought she was the smartest person I've ever known. And I think she passed a little bit of that gift of teaching to me. And so what I wanted to do, in addition to the television and the podcast, is create the Online Gardening Academy as a way to work with a smaller group of students. I mean, as many that wanted to enroll as they wanted, but it would be a chance for me to really engage with these folks who have an opportunity to ask me questions any day of the week, and for me to engage with them through Zoom calls every week and what we call office hours, and provide coaching and training. But really, I'm working with them directly, because the difference, Moshe, with that and television is when I'm doing TV, I'm just talking to a lens, and I never know who sees it unless I hear from them. But there's no follow-up there, other than maybe thanks for that very nice comment. But with the Online Gardening Academy, and those are my students, and I'm their teacher/mentor, we've got a real ongoing interaction, and lots of friendships have formed from that. But that's been a huge joy of mine, and where I'll spend more of my time in the future going forward than probably anything else.
Yeah, I think mentoring at a certain point, there is a real joy, and you impact and you change people's lives is tremendous. So
thank you.
I want to say thank you so much, Joe, because really super informative. How can the audience, how can we find out more about your TV show and the work you're doing? How can we do that?
Thank you. I think the best place is probably my main website, joegardener.com. And although my name is Joe Lample, years ago on my first TV show, a host from another show on HGTV saw me walking down the driveway to a party one day, and he said, "Hey, here comes Joe Gardener." And it's the first time I'd heard that term, but I thought, wow, that sounds pretty good, but anyway, that's when you could get the .com for pretty much anything you wanted. So I got joegardener.com, and then I ended up trademarking it, and it became my main business name. But I tell people, hey, I'm Joe Lample, the Joe behind Joe Gardener. So anyway, joegardener.com is where kind of the hub would be to find out about the podcast and the Online Gardening Academy. And on social, I'm most active on Instagram at Joe Gardener, of course. So I'm easy to find.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. It's been great. Thank you.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Common Denominator podcast. Join us next week for another inspiring, impactful, and empowering conversation. To learn more about Moshe, head to moshepopak.com. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it. And we'd be grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the show.